I'm going to introduce Joe Fassler, who's the features editor of New Food Economy. He's stepping in for Stephanie Strom, who is sick today, but is a fantastic person to lead this topic of sustainable seafood. So, Joe, have at it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As Lauren mentioned, I'm Joe Fassler. I'm the features editor at the New Food Economy. We are a nonprofit newsroom based here in New York, covering the economics, politics, and culture of American food. And as you know, today we're here to talk about seafood, specifically sustainability. And I think probably most of the people in this room know that our oceans are in trouble, and that the ecosystems are really in trouble in the world's oceans. That awareness, I think, is starting to dawn on sort of more mainstream consumers, people who don't specialize in food or have a special interest in food the way that you guys do. But just to kind of set the stakes here, across the globe, fisheries are on the verge of collapse, and there's a UN stat you have probably heard that 85% of global fish stocks are, quote, overexploited, depleted, or recovering from depletion. So ocean's in trouble, and demand is stronger than ever for seafood. Today we're going to talk about some specific harvesting and production methods, but we're also going to get beyond that and talk about the way that those methods are actually messaged to consumers, and the language that we actually use to talk about these issues, because that can be both a part of the problem and a part of the solution. So we'll also talk about some of the key practices and how to build more meaningful public engagement around this issue. So I'm joined by a really great knowledgeable group to talk about this specific set of issues. I'm joined by Gabe Andrews, to my left, who is Sustainable Seafood Program Director at the Safina Center, Mike Meeker, who's the COO of Manna Fish Farms, Doug Bush, who's the Managing Member and GM of the Cultured Abalone, Julie Q, who's Marketing Director of Australis Aquaculture, Michael Chernow, who's the owner of Seymours, and Julianna Fischer, who is the community organizer at the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. So to kick this off, I thought we might start with you, Michael, because you, in some ways, are perhaps the most directly consumer-facing person up here, working at a restaurant that specifically prides itself and has received accolades for its seafood sustainability practices specifically. And sustainability is a squishy word. It's a concept that can be nebulous. I bet we perhaps all have different definitions of it up here. And I'm wondering how you define it at the restaurant and how you telegraph those values to the people who eat with you.
Sure, thank you so much. First of all, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you guys for joining us. I think the best way to sort of kick it off for me is just to tell you guys what Seymours is all about. And Seymours was essentially is a food concept, a seafood concept that I launched about 3 years ago. That is a fully sustainable, local, wild seafood concept. And what spawned the idea for me was I grew up in New York City, and on Sundays as a kid I would always go fishing at a Freeport or Captree, Long Island on the party boats. And I grew passionate about fishing throughout my whole life. And I launched a restaurant called The Meatball Shop about 9 years ago. 5 years into that, I really started to get an itch to get creative again, and seafood was something that I really wanted to put a spotlight on because it meant so much to me in what I put into my body and some of the best experiences and memories I have using my body. And so I came up with this idea for Seymours, and it started with I wanted to showcase fish that I grew up catching. And growing up on the East Coast, the fish that you catch on the East Coast on a party boat are fluke, flounder, sea bass, blackfish, bluefish, porgy, skate, sea robin, and a bunch more if you go a little further north into New England. There's hake and pollock and haddock and monkfish. Anyways, I had never seen these fish on menus here in New York City. I never saw them. I just didn't. And I'm a restaurant guy. I've been working in restaurants my whole life. And so I wanted to open up a restaurant that showcased that. Peeling back the onion a little bit, what we found out, or what myself and the team that I assembled around me found out, was the majority of these fish don't have a place in the market because people don't want them. Why? Because they don't know them. because tuna, salmon, halibut, cod, shrimp, and scallops really sort of have a corner on the market. And so people thought I was crazy to open up a seafood restaurant that was only going to serve these species of fish. I also found out that these species of fish happen to be abundant and sustainable. And now I'm not only opening up a restaurant that serves species of fish that people don't really know at all, but you're stepping into the world of sustainability, and it's pretty controversial, and it's pretty intense, specifically in the seafood supply chain. And so at Seymours, what we do is we serve fish that's local and wild, and they all happen to be sustainable because nobody wants them. And that's the truth, and that's what we do. And so we've created this awesome atmosphere around these species of fish, so people aren't really so concerned about what they're eating in the restaurant, but how they feel when they come into the restaurant. And so we're able to sell bluefish to the masses, which is something that no one has ever been able to really do before in a place like New York City, because they have a great time when they're there, and they're excited about being there. And when we get tilefish and black sea bass, when they're running, people are super excited because they have heard of tilefish and black sea bass, but not as much the bluefish and the porgy. And so we work with Greenpoint Fish and Lobster Co. I'm a partner in the business. They're our number one purveyor. We get 95% of our fish from them. And because we work so closely with them and directly with them, they have direct relationships with fishermen as opposed to direct relationships with wholesalers. They work with fishermen, and they know exactly what's landed. They know when it's landed. They know who landed it. It makes our life very, very easy and special. And so we connected with the James Beard Foundation, and they have a smart catch program where they come and they assess sort of randomly on a quarterly basis or bi-quarterly basis, and they audit all of your fish. And so we are a leader in sustainability through the James Beard Smart Catch program, which is super, super special for us. We hide nothing. And so that's what we do. You know, we focus on our relationship with Greenpoint Fish and Lobster, our trust with Greenpoint Fish and Lobster, that everything is caught sustainably with the proper gear types in the proper regions, and everything is tracked properly. And that's what we do.
And before we talk, more specifically about some methods, that you guys might be using or trying to bring to the marketplace. When we were talking before the panel a little bit, you said, we try not to overwhelm our guests. Like, people just don't want to go out to eat for a night and have to learn about, the ins and outs of spearfishing or whatever. They just don't want to think about it. I mean, some do, but
that might be fun.
Yeah. Or whatever, trawling or Monterey Bay or whatever.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, for other people up here, how do you guys deal with the sort of, ethical overwhelm that everybody is on all the time with the news, terrible news stories from all over the world, all of these dangers and issues lurking in the supermarket. I mean, people are exhausted. They don't necessarily want to deal with it. How do you start to have that conversation? Do you choose to have that conversation?
My name is Doug. I'm a shellfish farmer in Santa Barbara, California, and I grow abalone. In direct reference to your question, we don't engage with that. It's impossible for us to do that. I like to refer, as a grower and a producer, I like to refer to myself as back of house. I like to offload that responsibility to the chefs and the storytellers and the writers. What we focus on as a grower is quality. With the example of what an abalone is a snail. It's a marine snail. It eats seaweed. It's a natural vegetarian, and it has a really delightful sort of fruita de mer kind of flavor that comes from being a vegetarian animal. It's an expensive species. It's a discretionary purchase. Nobody needs abalone. A lot of shellfish is a premium buy. But if somebody wants to invest in shellfish, it's got to be good. And we really focus on flavor, appearance, and I think that care translates through as sort of a proxy for the message of sustainability and stewardship. That's my hope, anyway, that care and quality kind of does the work for me, and that reflects obviously in market share and the way that we're able to position ourselves with our buyers.
So my name is Gabe Andrews, and I'm with the Safina Center. We're a small nonprofit that partners with Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch. So just raise your hand real quick if you've heard of Seafood Watch. So maybe about 30%. So we basically rate and rank wild-caught species, and so there is a lot of complexity and confusion in the marketplace. And we're going to talk a little bit about our rating systems later. But what we do is to try to simplify that for you as consumers. So we do all the hard science, and we're looking at our definition of sustainability is how many fish are there and how many are we taking? What are the effects on other species? How effective is management, which it turns out in the US, it's very effective. And the last one is what are the impacts on the ecosystem? And so we take all of those factors and we give you a simple score. And so we developed a guide in the early 2000s through the Safina Center, and then partnered with Monterey Bay more recently, and they now have an app because we live in the age of the apps. And that gives you a really simple tool in the grocery store to choose green, which is our best choice, yellow, which is a good alternative, and then red, which is what you should avoid at all costs. And our third partnership is with Whole Foods, and they committed to stop selling red-rated species in 2012. And so when you go to their stores, you should only see things that we rank through our science program as green or yellow. And so that is our methodology to try to bring us something that's very complex into something that's digestible to you as consumers. And so that's sort of how we address that issue.
Let's talk a little bit more about wild catch, and then we'll move on to aquaculture. Do you have a thought on that specifically?
I was just going to share how we answer the tough questions from our consumers. Just a quick.
Sure, yeah, please.
Okay, so as a barramundi producer, we sell our product into food service and in retail. We are a fish farm, which is highly controversial, and I think that there's a lot of questions that are out there. The way that we address it is to have a really set, clear FAQs list on our website, first and foremost, and making sure that our customers, our chefs and influencers are aware of how we process, farm, and feed our fish. So being transparent about those really tough questions is one way that we can get ahead of this. But it's been honestly very difficult as a fish producer to get that type of attention and get that openness from a consumer. You guys all are amazing because you're here and you ask the questions, but general Americans, they look at farm fish and they're just not sure what to think. But it's about first asking them, why don't you ask the questions about farm fish instead of just assuming that it's all bad?
Yeah, so to your point, Julie, I mean, a lot of people, they don't have the time or attention span or the knowledge to ask really nuanced questions. And so thinking just about wild-caught fish for a minute, we'll talk about aquaculture in a second. If for somebody with a really limited, ability to think about these things, to entertain these topics, what matters is about, shortening the supply chain, maybe joining like a CSA or CSF and trying to work locally? Is it about paying attention to specific species and only eating, certain kinds of fish or shellfish, maybe in a certain season? I mean, what are the sort of areas that people can drill down into if they're never really going to be masters of this sort of more in the weeds stuff, specifically with wild-caught fish?
Well, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I will. My name is Julianna Fischer, and I'm a community organizer with the Northwest Atlantic Marine Alliance. So we're a fisherman-led organization, and we're really trying to build a movement toward healthy fisheries and fishing communities. And so central to that is that we believe that community-based fishermen are the best stewards of the ocean resource because they have so much knowledge of being on the water every day and knowing that resource, and they have scale-appropriate fishing methods. And so we aren't going to stop eating seafood as a species, as a human species. And so we really have to decide how we want to eat seafood is really the question. We believe that we need to support community-based fishermen. So that's like, if you're thinking about farmers, it's kind of the family farms versus factory farms question. And so we want to support the community-based and the family fishermen. And many of the women who fish also self-identify as fishermen, so I'm not being ignorant. And so the way that we've answered the question is we have a business card size, just 7 principles for choosing seafood. And so we think that we need to have simple and traceable supply chains. Eating with the ecosystem is really important. And so knowing what is in season locally and what even species are in, like you were talking about, underutilized species are really important to be eating, not just the shrimp and the tuna. Also, just trying to have a more direct relationship with the person who is catching your seafood. So knowing your fisherman and like your farmer, and really trying to just be knowledgeable about and ask the questions of where, how, when your fish was caught, so that, and if you aren't able to get those answers, then maybe you shouldn't be purchasing that seafood.
Yeah. So let's talk about aquaculture for a minute, seafood that's farmed. I think for some people, sometimes farmed seafood has a bit of a stigma, unfairly in the marketplace, maybe because it's newer and even less familiar to some people. And so we've got a couple great representatives of the aquaculture industry up here. When done well, it can be a very benign and highly sustainable approach. Julie, Mike, or any of you guys, I'm curious your thoughts on what role aquaculture specifically has to play in making seafood writ large more sustainable.
Is this on? Yeah, it's on. I've been growing fish for 35 years now. Started off, I'm an environmentalist, for sure. The questions that people have in fish farming are understandable. The reason that I'm working with Manna is because unlike Doug, who and that's a smart way, is to try to stay in the background, we're at the forefront of this, and we can't avoid it. So we're answering the tough questions, and Manna believes in transparency. They're going to set up a site off the coast of New York here and others, and they believe, as I did, in transparency. So if you have questions, the general public, have questions about what we're doing and how we're doing it, we'll answer those questions, absolutely and honestly. And I've been promoting tours to my farm for 35 years. And it's a great thing because people don't know about what we do, and we tell them to come and stand on the platforms and see the fish swimming and watch us feed them. And there's no way to replace that. It's an experience that people have to have, because then they understand what we do. They see it, they can feel it, they can touch it. It's important. And it transforms a lot of people that are on the fence about aquaculture to being pro-aquaculture. And you probably know, or you should know, that less than 10% of the seafood that you, Americans, eat right now is either caught or grown in the US. Everything else comes from somewhere else. And that's sad. That's not good, because I can tell you right now that the regulatory agencies that look at that fish as it comes in from wherever, and I'm not speaking about the barramundi, because there's some fantastic companies growing fish outside of the US importing them in, but there's an awful lot that are not. And they're not tested for things like malachite green, mercury, the stuff. If you want to be reassured about the fish that you're eating from aquaculture or the Wildcaught, I'm sure, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the Wildcaught because I'm not, but on the aquaculture, we have so many. Like, we're on the front lines of everything. We're the most looked at industry in pretty well the world. And you can be sure that in Canada and the US, what you're buying has been looked at and looked at and looked at. We have, for example, the ASC certification program, the BAP certification program. Whole Foods has their own program. Costco has their own program. They're enormously difficult for the farmer to be in compliance with. And you need to know that, because we've been fighting with these things for years, because in the last talk they talked about the farmers getting screwed. Well, that was the term the guy used, and he's right, because we have to be in compliance with these. It takes time, takes money, and really we haven't got the benefit. The public doesn't know about them and how difficult they are to stay in compliance with, and how safe the food is that we grow. or again, I'm not going to talk about catching because I don't do that. But so the aquaculture part, no matter who you are, what you believe, the wild-caught, as you said at the beginning, wild-caught's going down. And that's no comment to the wild-caught people. It's just a simple fact. The United Nations has been talking about it for 10 years, and the wild-caught has gone down. For the first time in history, recorded history, people are now eating more farmed seafood than ever in recorded history. It's 52, 55% and rising. And it's only going to go up. So, whether you have an ethical issue with that, it is a fact. And if the population increases to 9 billion, or whatever they're predicting it's going to be in 10 or 20 years, and we have 7 billion now, people want to eat more fish. If they're going to eat more fish, we have to grow it. And the people that are involved in growing it, like myself and Manna, are totally committed to growing it in an environmentally friendly way. Like the word sustainable, because I've been at this for so long, since 1984, the word sustainable doesn't mean too much to me anymore. But, the concept is important. So when we're looking at sustainability, me personally and Manna Fish Farms, we're looking at how, like you said, how do you grow the fish so you're doing it right? And I know from 35 years of experience growing fish at my home, I'm one of the only guys who lives where I grow the fish. And I raised my 2 boys there. So, they swam, we boated, we lived where we grew the fish. And I have thousands of hours of diving. So when you talk about how do we do it right, the fish farms out there, all around me, and the ones in the oceans, are beneficial to the indigenous species that are around them. They're beneficial because they're putting more nutrients in the water, and they're providing an area like an artificial reef. That's in effect exactly what it is. So they're providing areas for juvenile fish to live and then spread out, and they're also providing areas of protection. So it doesn't matter which species of fish are indigenous to where the farm is, they're beneficial. And that's something that people are beginning to realize, and we have a significant amount of research. So you can check all this stuff, that I'm saying, because there's a significant amount of research. So yeah. I can go on forever, so it's sorry about that, but I was sitting here antsy, hearing everybody else saying all good stuff, and
yeah, I'm curious when we're talking about the difference, and Doug, I'm interested in your thoughts on this as well. Can we have the same definition of sustainability between aquaculture and wild-caught? Do we need to have 2 different, standards? How are we going to define that when we're already having trouble getting people to pay attention to these issues? Now do we have to worry about sort of 2 multiple side-by-side, different sets of standards to memorize and worry about?
I'd argue they're completely different. There's almost no overlap at all. But I think that, speaking for myself and most of my professional colleagues, we're serial optimists. Almost all of the successful aquaculture businesses that I work with and the people that I am fortunate enough to know, their hands wet. They want to be problem solvers. And I'll just give and there's just such a tremendous diversity of people out there trying to look at unique issues in the seafood world and come up with a creative way to address it. I'll just give 2 real quick projects that we're currently working on. So we grow abalone, we feed them seaweeds. So because we feed them seaweeds, we've grown into, in the same way that a dairyman is at his essence a pasture person and has to know grasses. We've really come to understand seaweeds and the potential for cultivating different types of seaweeds has really emerged as a real growth sector for our business plan. Shellfish and low trophic seafood, to me, is a sort of a unifying concept across sustainability. Eat lower trophic level if possible. Eat local if possible. So our seaweed, another really interesting thing that represents a really neat partnership between capture and aquaculture is something we're doing right now. Many of you may have heard of urchin barons or uni sea urchin concerns right now. Sea urchin is getting very, very popular at the same time that it's getting more and more difficult to find. On the West Coast, we have large expanses of reef where purple urchins, which are not the preferred fishery species, have grazed reef areas down to mineral rock, and these are known as urchin barons. The purple urchins then can subsist for 10 years or more, essentially empty, essentially devoid of any commercial value, and prevent the regeneration of a healthy reef system. It can limit the growth of healthy kelp forest. It can shoulder out commercially valuable species. So we've got a real issue there with these purple urchin barons. So I'm working directly with some members of the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara, urchin divers, to go out and collect empty purple urchins, bring them to our farm, and then fatten them on seaweeds that we are specifically cultivating at our farm in tanks. And we get a really, and this is a very new thing that we're very excited about, but we get a product where not only do you have something which kind of works to solve a problem, but it also creates a tremendously consistent taste and yield on a purple urchin product, which is highly desirable and is also has a foot in the door of regenerating a reef ecosystem. So it's that sort of, that's to me where the real opportunities and innovation for aquaculture and capture fisheries exist. And when you get partners, especially partnerships that have a foot in each bucket of capture and aquaculture, where you're looking at a local challenge, embracing a little optimism, working with consumers and chefs, and then all that stuff falls by the wayside. All the certifications and the sustainability, the narrative does it for you. People become excited about what that product is. A chef becomes excited about, in the front of house and the communication. It just works so beautifully and vertically. And something like that, you can make money, create a great product, solve a problem. You can do that stuff. That's the nucleus of my whole business model.
Yeah. So one thing we've talked about is like one solution is buy local, buy from people that support your local dock, look at shorter supply chains. But as was mentioned before, only 10% of the seafood we eat in the States, comes from local waters. Are there cases where the local product isn't necessarily the best thing, or where one that comes from farther away might be good? Julie?
Yes. I actually would challenge, I firmly believe that eating wild local seafood is the right thing to do, but when it comes to farm products, the U.S. is actually pretty behind in finfish aquaculture. You see, oyster farms all over the place, but finfish is still an emerging thing. And I wouldn't say that the seafood industry is the same as land-based food production. So the idea of local farms fish being the right thing isn't necessarily true. I would say sustainability does have to mean different things to many different people. I think there's room for a lot of different solutions. For us, it is to try and scale production in a responsible, environmentally responsible and socially responsible manner. But we do supply to Australia and the US and parts of Asia a fish that has a story and that you can trace the whole lineage of that product from feed to hatchery to harvest and processing. So having that clear story and being able to definitely know and prove that you are getting what you're buying is incredibly important. So I would say that certifications such as BAP is still really helpful when there are third-party auditors coming into your plants, into your farms, and making sure that you are doing what you say you are doing, instead of just having this wonderful story that everybody's buying into, but maybe that's not really the case. So.
Yeah. Curious, we've talked a lot about the consumer, but maybe to a degree that emphasis is misplaced. Are there things that your retail partners could do that would make all of your jobs easier, that would make this question of sustainability much more of an accessible and reachable goal? In other words, instead of focusing on individual behavior, is there things we can do in the marketplace that would be far more effective than like admonishing people for not buying the right thing?
I'm going to jump in there. I think that's a great question, and it's one of the big problems for us is point of source information is so expensive that when the farmers are trying to work with individual stores, even chain stores, it's really difficult to get that point of source information. One of the things that was tried up in Canada, up in our area, was you could go up to a fish shop, and there's a fillet and there's a little, what do you call those, barcodes? You could take your phone and just flash on that barcode, and it would tell you where that fish was caught and when it was caught and by what company and what's their philosophy about commercial fishing. And we're working on that for farm fish. So it's really difficult to educate people. I mean, people out there are not stupid, that by any means. They just don't have the time to really research what we do. And so our big problem has been, how do we get that information out there? So point of source stuff, I think if you went out to the stores where you're buying the fish and said, hey, where does this fish come from? And unfortunately now, probably the majority of the times, you're going to get somebody working at minimum wage that doesn't know or care. But if you ask that question a lot, then they're going to start to realize it at the store level and at the chain level, and they're going to have people available that can answer your questions in an intelligent way. Like you talked about shorting the chain. If you go down and try the rainbow trout, it's organic rainbow trout. If you try it down there, you'll see the flavor. We harvested that the day before it was sitting here ready for you guys to eat. So, with short chain, it was flown here, came out of the water, it was processed, and here within a day. And that's the kind of thing that you want to find out from your supplier. And so I hate to say it, but I throw it back on you to answer that question, is you need to push the people you're buying your fish from. You need to ask them those questions and demand answers.
I mean, to that point, are there any technologies on the horizon or that are here already that are making that easier, either for companies to tell the story of their fish, or for retailers and consumers to have more control? There's a company, Viant, that you may have heard of, that's supposedly using blockchain to trace these fish catches. But are there other things that you guys are paying attention to that could transform the information flow?
Well, I'm just going to emphasize before everybody else has a shot there. That one I was talking about was called This Fish, and it's a fantastic way to get that information out to people when they're just going to the grocery store, and everybody's got a phone. So you just click on it and you got the story. And when I talked to the people that were running that, they were going to make our farm the first farmed fish that they were going to carry under that program, which was quite a compliment, but it needs to be pushed. And they're not going to do that kind of thing because it costs money unless you guys, the consumers, ask for it. That's what I'm going to end on, because it puts the pressure on you to demand so you know where that fish is coming from. And if, for example, my fish, Julie will have the same thing. She said the story. It's important people know the story. We know our fish from egg until where it goes and where it's sold, and we can trace it right from the egg right to the store that it was sold to. And therefore, if someone has a question, we can answer that question about those fish. But you have to demand from the buyers that you need that information to make an intelligent choice about what you're feeding yourself or your children or whatever. So there are technologies, but you need to demand it because it costs money, right? It costs the stores money, and they're not going to do it unless you demand it. That's just from my perspective.
Sure. So we are unique as a barramundi producer. We're vertically integrated, and that's actually a little bit difficult to find in the farm fish industry. So just by visiting the website, and you can also identify a lot code on every single piece of fish that we produce, we know exactly which harvest, area that it's from. We know exactly how much is processed. And that is actually the opportunity that responsibly farmed produce can deliver that some of the wild fisheries cannot, is full traceability to the end. And I would say it doesn't have to be super high tech. I think blockchain is incredible, but implementing it on the ground is going to take quite a lot of time. I can't imagine, fishermen with their cell phones just, tagging fish. But simple things like knowing you can have a conversation with us on social media, you can just visit the website or go into these events like this. That if we do enough of it and people are open to it, then that can also solve a lot of the questions.
I just would add one thing. I think a lot of what this, a lot of the controversy really is behavioral, right? Like changing behavior in general is probably just about the most difficult thing to do. It's just, think about, when credit cards came into play, people were like, what do you mean? And now there are some places that don't even take cash. So, and that took about 35 years. So, I think behavior, introducing something that will ultimately change the way people have to think about a product or an activity, it just takes time. It simply takes time. And I'm speaking on behalf of consumers. I'm also speaking on behalf of restaurants. And I'm a unique I'm unique. I think actually more and more restaurants today are serving probably more farm-raised fish than they are serving wild fish. And we have nothing against farm-raised fish, but the story and the philosophy of Seymours is that of we serve the fish that swim local to New York. And so I just think that there is a lot of controversy in anything that's brought to the market that is going to have to make people change anything they do, the way they think about something. People love drama. Think about TV, Bravo, most successful network on television. Why? Because everybody's fighting with each other. They love it.
Yeah. So are certifications a useful tool in all of this, or is that not helpful? Do people use them? What are the important ones? How big a deal is the certification approach to this problem?
So we're actually rather critical of most certifications. Marine Stewardship Council, Aquaculture Stewardship Council, and Seafood Watch are the big ones that folks know about. And there's a number of reasons for that, but we tried, I was going to mention this in the technology piece too, but we tried to create something different where people can eat seafood that aligns with their values. And so we have helped to cultivate a network of values-based seafood businesses. And we have a map online of all the places around the country where you can get seafood that is caught with a set of values that this network has created. There's 9 values on the website. It's called localcatch.org. But I think the certifications are a good start, but they don't go far enough. They oftentimes are most negatively impact the smallest producers because they don't have the means to pay for the certification. And then there's also that something that is abundant here in New York, but that is not abundant in a different ecosystem somewhere else, is still labeled as don't eat this. And so the fishermen have a hard time marketing their catch that is abundant and sustainable. In New York, the example of this is skate. Skate is a really abundant fish here, really sustainable, but it is not. It is labeled as a ray on major certification lists, which is then red listed. And then it's also trying to stay in line with the criteria that certifications bring. A report came out a week or two ago that of the over 400 salmon fish farms that were certified by ASC, only 32 of them were in compliance, but they're all still certified. And so it's a good start, but it just doesn't go far enough, is my opinion.
So I'd like to step in a little bit. So we do, with the Safina Center and Seafood Watch, it's a non-voluntary program. So we rate fisheries regardless if they want us to rate them or not. So it's not really a fisherman access like it is with MSC, where they have to pay to have that certification. And so what we do is we look at what fish are in the marketplace, because we want to have the biggest effect that we can. So we'll rate those fish species that you can go buy at stores. And if it comes out red, it comes out red. So it kind of incentivizes those fishermen and those producers to improve, because they get access to that niche market, right? So there's going to be a higher, I think someone said it during our call, is that good fish isn't cheap and cheap fish isn't good. And so one of the things we need to do is change our outlook as consumers and be willing to pay for that better fish that is rated by organizations that have a stake in a healthy ocean and nothing more. We don't care if, I mean, of course we want those fishermen and those fisheries to improve, but we're gonna report on what we find based on our science. And I think that's what sets us apart from MSC, who, like I said, fishermen or organizations have to pay for that certification. So yeah, that's.
I want to move over.
Oh, sorry.
I think we're almost out of time. So I want to move to audience questions. But before we do, just a really quick exercise. If you could you say you have a friend, they care about this, they want to do the right thing. You know, I think so many people just want to check a box, and you only have one thing you can tell them, and in one sentence, about how they're going to improve their fish buying behavior. What is it? And it has to be really short, because your friend has a really low attention span. We can go in order, or if you think of it, you can just go ahead, whatever makes more sense.
I would say eat low on the food chain.
Check what you're eating. Take the time to check what you're eating and what you're buying, because if you do that, for example, if you were going to take our steelhead...
One sentence.
Your
friend, you already lost your friend. You lost your friend already.
One sentence was 2 years old. Okay, check what you're eating, because once you know it's good, you can buy it again. Was that 2 sentences?
That's good. No, that's good. That's perfect. Oh, there's a colon in there somewhere. Okay.
You're tough.
Buy from the boat or the farm.
Okay, 3 parts. Eat more oysters and other shellfish. Consider barramundi, and reconsider frozen.
Frozen, yeah.
Download Seafood Watch and only eat green or yellow.
Ask how, where, and when your fish was caught. And don't buy it if you can't get that answer.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Cool. We have a burning question from the audience. Yeah.
I talked to Mike about this for a little bit, and my question is, what is fish farming doing about microplastics? So 90% of our shellfish has plastic in it. You're guaranteed that you're eating it. Everyone here is eating it. It's in their drinking water. So what are you all doing to address that? And can you address it? Or do we have to just get used to the fact that we're going to eat plastic in our fish?
I mean, that's a great question. It's a huge impact, and it's not just in shellfish, and it's not just in seafood. It's in everything. So,
It's in beer.
I mean, the question of what to do about microplastics is not just for this panel. Like, you could have a whole conference about it. What we could all do is use less plastic.
What I'm asking is, there's no technologies in your industry that is currently addressing this right now.
Filtration gets more expensive the smaller you go.
Yeah.
So it will add cost to do that. Siting is a critical thing. So not all the ocean is not uniform. Plastic distribution of microplastics in the worldwide oceans is not the same. So there are probably potentials for reducing impact. But the microplastic question is a worldwide crisis, in my opinion.
I wish we had time for more questions. I think we're out of time. But please come find any of us. Sorry, that was my bad. We ran over. Come talk to us. I'm available, and anyone here, and we would be really glad to continue the conversation. Thanks so much.